Hello, Mississippi Annual Conference. I'm Reverend Todd Watson, pastor of several decades in the United Methodist Church in Mississippi, and as of July 1, District Superintendent for the Central District of the Mississippi Annual Conference. I'm here to talk to you today about what in your church is probably called the Nominating Committee, or officially called the Committee on Lay Leadership Development. Whatever your church calls this group, in this video we will refer to it as the Committee on Lay Leadership. The Committee on Lay Leadership is probably the most important committee in your church because it vets and proposes all other elected leadership in your church. From finance to property, from missional direction to Sunday school for your children, your Committee on Lay Leadership has a big job, and the people on this committee have a holy and responsible task. Titus chapter 2 verses 1 through 9 is a good measure for any man or woman who will serve in church leadership. Here are a few ideals of church leadership mentioned in that passage that define a good and sound church. Speak the things which are proper for sound doctrine. Be sober, reverent, temperate, sound in faith and faithful in love and patience. Be discreet, chaste, and obedient. Show yourself to be a pattern of good works, in doctrine showing integrity, reverence, incorruptibility. Be sound in your speech. That cannot be condemned, that one who is an opponent may be ashamed, having nothing evil to say of you. These are traits of the Committee on Leadership and the traits of all other leadership, actually, in addition to any specialty tasks or skills like finance or property or teaching that the church may use for its growth and stability. Remember, our denominational motto is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. All church leadership need to be about this cause if our churches are to be effective in loving and serving our world. Regarding the discipline and its governance of our churches, there are some significant changes in other areas of church governance and order, especially if your church has moved to the simple governance model. However, if your church has kept the traditional United Methodist Church structure, there has been little, if any, change in the structure and role of the Committee on Lay Leadership Development in the 2020-2024 Book of Discipline. According to our discipline, the Committee on Lay Leadership is to be composed of not more than 9 persons. That may seem few, especially for some of our larger churches, but remember, in a church where leadership terms of office are staggered in 3-year cycles, the Committee on Lay Leadership is generally not filling more than a third of church offices every year. The other 2/3 continue in office until their terms of service expire. In preparing for this video, I read all of part 4 of chapter 1 of the United Methodist Discipline, which is titled The Local Church. I had not read this section since seminary and had forgotten how rich our tradition is, as it defines and describes the church and its work in our world. If you would like an informational and aspirational understanding of what our denomination hopes your church will be, I recommend this reading to you. It might take you half an hour and is well worth your time. Though the Administrative Council is the first named committee of the church, beginning in paragraph 244, in our Book of Discipline, the Committee on Lay Leadership is mentioned multiple times in following paragraphs and pages. If the Charge Conference is the yearly meeting where the church celebrates what occurred in the past year and what it hopes to accomplish in the new year, then the Committee on Lay Leadership is who puts people in the committees and teams who will get those ministry dreams accomplished. The slate of elected leadership presented by the Committee on Lay Leadership is elected each year at the annual Charge Conference of the church or charge. This is very important work for people who will care for the institutional needs of the church, like finance and building repair, are elected at Charge Conference, as well as those people who will dream ministry and mission, such as people on the Administrative Council or any missional ministries that the church supports. Getting the correct people into any church's leadership is the most important task that a church undertakes in any year. Having the wrong people in leadership can cripple and at times even kill a church. Having the correct people in leadership can grow a church. So, members of the Committee on Lay Leadership, your work is important. Don't treat this like it's just writing names on a list so you can be done with a meeting. You may have forgotten this, but our Book of Discipline lists qualifications for any person serving on committees of a church. The list echoes the traits I mentioned from Titus 2 and adds a few more from various other biblical references. Church committee members must be persons of genuine Christian character who love the church. That genuine Christian character, which means that these folks are attempting to live as Jesus did and love of their church, should be the agenda of anyone being elected to church leadership. So we are looking for people who live their faith and want the church to become more. Church committee members must be persons who are morally disciplined, and this moral discipline is not limited to just human sexuality topics, which has dominated our church in recent years. Do these persons treat all persons with respect? Do they exemplify a person trying to imitate the life of Jesus Christ? Are these persons good stewards of their resources, meaning, do they tithe and give sacrificially to their church? Do these persons show moderation and balance in their life? Church committee members must be persons committed to including all people who desire to be a part of your local church. Committee members must be people of welcome, who invite all people to come and share in their church's life. In other words, these people know that their church is not a closed club. Members of this committee seek to put all kinds of people in leadership, not just the people who have always served. Church committee members must be persons who abide the ethical standards as noted in the United Methodist social principles. This means that only people who welcome all people who are seeking God should be guiding the ministry and mission of the local church. Church committee members need to include youth and young adults to get a perspective of how these folks might shape our church to grow new church members and new church leaders for the present and the future. We always want to include our older, wise leadership, but they must share the guidance of the church with younger people moving forward in their faith. Committees like the trustees can include people from the community when a church needs a particular expertise not found in the membership of the church. For example, if the trustees of a particular church need the insight of a contractor, they are allowed to put such a person from the local area on the trustees, even if he's not a church member. Not so with the Committee on Lay Leadership. The persons on this committee must be members of the local church or a member of a church on the charge or circuit. The pastor of any Methodist church, any United Methodist Church, is the administrative member of the Committee on Lay Leadership and actually functions as the chair of this committee. However, though the pastor is officially the chair, the slate of officers and leadership in the church should not come solely from the pastor or paid staff. Please listen to your pastor's suggestions, but he or she does not need to be the origin of the entire slate of leadership. The Committee on Lay Leadership needs to have people who have insight into human nature and sees potential in untested and new leadership. We all have a tendency to place safe people, known leaders, into leadership year after year. However, leaders get tired, get stale, and lose interest over time. Putting some new folks on committees alongside legacy leaders allows change to occur slowly over time in a way that lets the church change at a pace that almost all folks can embrace. As I mentioned earlier, the pastor functions as the chair of the Committee on Lay Leadership. This structure has historically allowed the pastor to limit total opposition to his or her leadership. But as I mentioned before, this power should be held as lightly as possible. In my decades of pastoring, I've never had to veto any nomination because I've suggested the following guidelines to aid in the nominations process. Did the person to be nominated attend the church's worship service and meetings 50% or greater across the past year? If people are not at church at least half the time or more, they really have no business being a church leader. When the person served on the committee or in leadership in the past, did they show up? Were they helpful in the committee work where they served in the past, or were they a hindrance? If a person did not do well in a committee setting before, there probably has not been a miraculous change that would make them fit now. Is the person being nominated the kind of personality that works well on a committee? In other words, do all decisions and choices have to be their way? Not everyone is a good committee member. Committees are about give and take so that there is room for everyone. If a committee on lay leadership member would be unwilling themselves to serve with a particular person on any committee, then they are not allowed to nominate that person. If there are misgivings about a person, then no nominated committee member is allowed to put them on a committee. Most church committees have staggered terms. Is there balance in the committee between the persons rolling off and those being newly elected? How do we need to balance a committee each year? For instance, do we need a lawyer or a banker on the trustees for an upcoming construction project? If you engage these basic stipulations, most leadership difficulties are eliminated before they're even begun. Though the Committee on Lay Leadership holds confidential all conversations in the committee until a slate is presented, the Committee on Lay Leadership does not trade in secrecy. Additionally, if someone perceives that a particular person is not a good fit for any particular leadership role, we have historically not spent time listing all the shortcomings or difficulties. We've simply said, I'm not sure that he or she would work particularly well in that spot. No need to gossip or talk about people. Just trust one another that such insight is honest and true. If the person is truly qualified, their name is going to come up again. Because this committee is at the very heart of a church and impacts all its mission and ministry, another important aspect of this Committee on Lay Leadership is that it should reflect all aspects of the membership of the church. There must be a balance, male and female, racial diversity that reflects your particular congregation, people of differing ages, people of differing educational backgrounds, people with disabilities, single persons, married persons, youth, young adults, and if you have more than one worship service, members from each service. Few churches have all those diversities, but let your committee reflect your church. No particular viewpoint or subgroup within any church should dominate the Committee on Lay Leadership, since this group is at the heart of all leadership in the church. Its balance and perspective are vitally important. Since the church is now over 2,000 years old and has appeared in many forms and guises, we sometimes forget the purpose of the church. I mentioned before our denominational motto, to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That purpose of the church in detail is to plan and to implement a program of nurture, outreach, witness, and resourcing for the work of the people it serves. Because the Committee on Lay Leadership is involved in providing leadership for all church activity, remembering this goal is of vital importance. We are not just filling slots. We are attempting to find people who will lead the church in nurturing, reaching out, witnessing, and resourcing the church in this world. In all aspects of church life, there are the needs of the church as an institution, which generally means what do we need to do to continue to function week after week, year after year. However, the needs of the institution are only the most basic needs of a church. To be a vital church, there needs to be new ministry and mission dreams spoken and launched. Yes, Committee on Lay Leadership, we need folks who will handle the church facilities and budget, but we also need folks in leadership who can see beyond just maintaining the institution. Include some dreamers in leadership to push the rest of us to move outward into the world. Now, let me wrap this up with some mandates from our Book of Discipline so that our Committee on Lay Leadership discussion is complete. If your church has moved to simplified governance, as I mentioned earlier, then you need to find the video by Reverend Trey Harper, who is the superintendent of the Capitol River District. He will detail the slate that is needed for that leadership model. However, if your church is using the traditional structure of the United Methodist Church, the Committee on Lay Leadership needs to nominate at least the following slate. They can nominate more, but no less than these positions: the chairperson of the Administrative Council, the Committee on Nominations and Lay Leadership Development, the pastor or staff parish relations committee, chair and members of the Committee on Finance, the financial secretary of the church treasurer, the board of trustees, lay members of the annual conference, and the recording secretary of the charge conference. I hope you've heard here today that yes, the Committee on Lay Leadership is vitally important to the work of your church. I encourage you to get into your hands a copy of the United Methodist Church's 2020-2024 discipline and seek all of the various references to the Committee on Lay Leadership. You are a vital committee. If a church wants to remain vital, it must grow in depth and numbers. The church leaders of mission and ministry determine your church's future. As the Committee on Lay Leadership, choose prayerfully and carefully. Participate in the Committee on Lay Leadership at your church. In your hands is the future of what God has in mind for your church too. Godspeed.